Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an episode of the Artenders with Mac and Dan. I am Dan, he is Mac.
Howdy.
And we do this podcast in order to review pieces of art, ranging from, it could be albums or video games or movies or TV shows, in order to keep ourselves as artists working and better articulate what we are thinking and what we want to say. And I suggested the pick for this week, in which we will be reviewing the first season of the hit TV show The Wire. This is a show that premiered in 2002 on HBO, and it was created by David Simon and was on syndication for until 2008. Had a very, very successful run, and is one of those, I think, one of those cult classic shows that are now especially up there in terms of quality of television with along the likes of Breaking Bad and The Sopranos.
Absolutely. So much so that Obama called it the best TV show of the, quote, past several decades. So there you go.
And so we're gonna look at the first season. We can't speak on, the other 5 seasons that this show holds. I think, I'm just gonna say this now, I think after watching the first season, we will be discussing the other 5 seasons.
We're absolutely gonna have to, yeah.
Because I think, before we get your take, of the just sheer quality of the writing and the acting and how everything was put together in its execution of the first season, that after you watch the first season, you can't help but want to watch more. But kind of speaking on those terms, and let's meander, if we will, into your thoughts on the show. Mac, what was your first impression when you were watching it, and then your final impression as you finished the first season of the show The Wire?
Well, it's funny that you say that. So I as I started watching the show initially, because I had expectations of it, because every single time that I ever see a show about police, about detectives, about taking down criminals and things like that, especially on network television and shot in the way that this is shot, single camera, I for a few episodes I was like, oh, they're doing this wrong. They're like, this isn't how it's supposed to look. Like they're really messing up the structure. You know what I mean? And then I was like, oh, that's not what the show is at all. That's not what the show is meant to be.
Because you get conditioned by shows like CSI and NCIS, and even like derivatives of that, like Law and Order, right? You're conditioned into those shows where like there is a structure, and even if there is a overall plot structure in terms of the season, we're so conditioned to, okay, it's 8 p.m. on a weekday night. All right, this show is on. This criminal show is on. Blue Bloods. It's always, same bleep, different asshole,
You same blue, different. Right. I like that you bleeped out shit, but not asshole. That's hilarious. That was awesome.
We'll just keep going. We're just gonna keep going.
So, my first hint should have been that it was HBO, that it's an HBO original show, because HBO would never air something that would air on USA. Or like TBS or something, there's not going to be Monk or Psych or Hawaii 5-0 or whatever, right? We could literally sit here and name detective TV shows for hours. There's so many.
The Rookie, Castle, Elementary,
Miami Vice.
I mean, we can. We can. I mean, for decades and decades, it is its own genre. Crime, it has become its own genre of television, but how this show approaches the crime genre is different, and I think the biggest element from the get-go, I would say, is how it covers both sides of the crime, quote-unquote, when you're looking at the Baltimore drug scene where this show is set, and you get a really, really interesting and super-duper, flawed perspective and humanity that is like the criminal investigation that's going on behind it and the detectives that are spearheading the work. But you also get the perspective of the people dealing the drugs, of the people doing, the drug organization, the whole 9 yards. We get this really interesting perspective that not only are we getting the sort of, as I like to call, the humanity and the stupidity of the detectives, but you also get that, if not doubly so, from the quote unquote criminals. I mean, they are criminals, like, to the law, right? But how this show depicts them at the same time. They're performing criminal activities, but that doesn't inherently make them criminals at heart, which is very interesting approach.
The show is fantastic about making sure that there are no good guys and bad guys. That they show the cops being awesome people and assholes, and they show criminals being awesome people and assholes. They show their families. They're really, really, really good about that. And also, as the series goes on, it becomes more and more clear the things they do in terms of directing, in terms of writing, that are meant to be parallels. People saying the same lines back to back. Like the criminals will say the same sentence as the detectives, but just in a different context. Or will operate in the exact same way, like that the detectives have to go to the higher ups before they can do anything, and then once they finally, and like it takes them several episodes to finally get just the permission to perform a single very menial task in the case, and that the exact same thing is happening with the criminals, and they're both having the same frustrations at the same times, and it's very, very, very interesting and super well done. And something that actually happened to me, it's so sad that I'm actually comparing these two shows, but the same thing happened to me with Rick and Morty. I know, where the more and more I watched, the more I realized that I wasn't paying enough respect to the show, and I wasn't paying enough respect to the writers. And I had to go back. I had to go back and watch episodes because I wasn't paying attention hard enough to catch the little things, because, and the show says this several times, every part matters. Every piece matters. Every piece is required to finish the puzzle. I think the direct quote from the show is "Every piece matters," and that was shockingly the same with Rick and Morty. The further you get into the seasons, because of course it's at first a very dumb TV show, and then it becomes kind of more interesting and complicated. But yeah, so that was something that I definitely had to do. You were watching this with your dad, correct? Had he watched it before?
Okay, so I knew going in, when I selected this pick, the first night I was about to put this on the TV, as I am currently home with my parents as opposed to being in Dallas. I just had a gut feeling of, you know what, maybe my dad would like this show. And that is what you call a home run in this industry, when it comes to sort of nailing the prediction of my father genuinely enjoyed the show. And the biggest sign of it that always brings me a bunch of joy is when, after we're finished eating dinner or something, or just towards the end of the evening, and then he kind of looks at me, but he looks at me with these dog eyes for some reason. It's always very funny. But then he says, "Do you want to watch another episode?" And I'm like, "Dad, please." "Yes, of course."
That's so cute. I love that. Yeah.
But I want to speak to the cleverness that you brought up with this show, in terms of its execution and the fact that all the pieces matter. Because I think the only detriment is a tough word, but the only thing that I would think is slightly bringing the show back, even though it is so purposeful and it's so well done at the same time, is the speed and the pacing of which the show goes. That if you miss something, that show hardly allows you to catch up, right? So you may get some snippets here and there where one of the characters, Lester Friedman, goes to two other detectives and "Okay, guys, you're gonna do this thing," and they're like, "What's that?" And then he gives you a very good detailed explanation with a sort of montage that happens, "Okay, so this is what they're doing, and this is the purpose, and this is what they're going to execute." But there are so many times also that a character drops a piece of information, or a character says, "I want to do this," or a character and another character meets up. Primarily, for example, I would say in the very first episode when you have Detective McNulty, played by Dominic West, who does a fantastic job in the show, when
Yeah.
he meets the judge in the very first episode and immediately is like, this is what's happening, this is what's happening. You don't understand that this is happening. And as a viewer, you're like, oh, holy crap, this is going super duper fast. Now, like, you're going to get caught up throughout the show as the show is about, what Detective McNulty brought up in that first conversation when it comes to the main, quote, antagonist, right, of Avon Barksdale, who's, I wouldn't say antagonist, because typically you think of antagonist as like a villain, right? But there are plenty of cases where that is not the case, and I don't think this is the case here. Not because Avon Barksdale does necessarily good things, but because of just the amount of humanity that you get in that character compared to the stereotypical villains in these kind of shows. I think Wood Harris does a phenomenal job, but like I said, that's the biggest thing that I think is holding this show back. Is the sort of rapid, dash to the pacing and to the story, and we have to get things going on constantly, which is also a good thing because then as the viewer, we have things constantly going on. But as I'm saying this, Mac, I honestly, aside from that, I have a hard time trying to pinpoint specific things that I, for example, did not enjoy about the show or did not
Yeah.
like about the show, or specific things that I thought the show didn't do well. Or did you have a similar experience in that regard?
Yeah. And I actually wanted to speak on the on the pacing of the show and why I think that might be. What's so interesting to me, and one of my absolute favorite parts of of watching shows like this, specifically shows that are very clever, very heady, very dense in terms of themes. I want so bad to know about process because I'm such a process nut. And so I have to do a bunch of research. I have to go online and find out everything I can about the writers and the directors and whoever created the show and why the heck they did. And this one is maybe the most interesting. I guess you can go ahead and call this my sizzle serve. This is the most interesting group of creators and story writers that I think we've ever reviewed, and maybe that I've ever heard of, because there are plenty of people that are like based on true events or whatever. But it's very interesting. So stop me if you have any questions or if you ever get bored. David Simon was one of the creators of the show. He started out as a journalist, a reporter in Baltimore, around the time that all of these things were happening, all like what the true events are based off of.
I want to say really fast, I had no idea about that. This is the first time I'm hearing this. Excuse me. Wow. Oh, and I cleared my throat into the microphone. That's a fine. But this is the first time that I'm hearing this information, as usually when I review stuff for the show, I don't usually do the research. Occasionally I will here and there. But for something like this, I just kind of look at it at face value of like, this is what I interpreted. This is what I understood. This is what I took away from this show. But just knowing that alone, I am super fascinated, but I also think it speaks to the quality of the characters of the show. But if you could please continue about the details that you found in your research.
No. Get ready, because if you like that, you're gonna die. So, David Simon, one of the creators of the show, was a journalist as all this was happening. Then became an editor, then became a book writer, and he wrote several books, several crime novels. So he was a novelist. This is the very first and only time he ever has tried to write something for TV, and write something for actors. So I think that is partially testament to the to that thing that you're talking about in terms of pacing, in terms of the rate at which we get information, and how every scene that we see for the first couple of episodes is seemingly slow, but it ends up being like so fast that you need to go back and watch it. So that was David Simon. He pairs up with his friend Ed Burns. Ed Burns is the other creator of the show, and he was also a crime novelist. But the reason that they know each other is because while David Simon was a reporter, Ed Burns worked for the Baltimore Police Department.
It all makes sense. It all makes
Yes.
sense.
He is what the McNulty character is based off of, because he was one of the people that was working on the ground and got really close to all of the other criminals and drug dealers and people that were in that community. And so he realized that he wanted to make a show about, and he wanted to call it The Wire because he was like, I think that's the most important part of most investigations that I've been a part of, and it's the hardest part because it takes forever for higher up to let you even start to find a wire, and then in terms of actually finding the wire, it's so rare that you actually find a reliable wire. Anyway, so they knew each other. They get they love the city of Baltimore. They're like, we want to make something about what is actually happening in Baltimore and actually happening in America, and make it as real as possible. Which is why the show looks the way it does. It is a very naturalistic looking show in terms of cinematography. They really don't do a lot. It's very grainy, and I'm like, oh, so this show was made like in the late 80s, early 90s, based off of just what it looks like, right? The way it's edited. And then you're like, oh wait, no, it was absolutely not. It's a lot more current than that. And then also in terms of the sound, something that I found was they talked a lot about. Have you ever heard of diegetic or non-diegetic sound? Diegetic sound is sound that comes from within the scene. Non-diegetic sound is like if there is like a score placed on top of it, and diegetic sound is if there's only music in the scene that comes from like a radio within the room. And so they use plenty of sound, but they have to justify it and they have to make it as real as possible. And they like whenever in the script something happens on a street corner, they have to go to the actual street that happens in the city. They have to film in Baltimore every single thing. They have to film on location. They have to film with the actual setting in mind. And another thing is that they pull like so much of the cast and so much of so many of the extras, things like that, are Baltimore natives, are people that live in Baltimore and really believe in the show. Even there was one of the wires in the original case, but that the show is based on. He obviously worked his sentence time down because he was in cahoots with the police, with the Baltimore PD. And because he worked his time down, he got out, at the age of like 50 or 60 or whatever, and he's on the show. He helped with the show, and he's not like a main part or anything. He's like, I think he's just like an extra or whatever. I'm not even sure if he's in season 1. This is just something that I read. Which is super interesting. All of the other writers on the show are crime novelists that David Simon and Richard Price know, crime novelists that are from Baltimore. So the reason that the show is paced the way it is and the reason that the show feels the way it does is because it's not written by TV writers. It's not written by film writers. It's written by novelists, and it's paced that way. Because they're not making this for entertainment value. They're making it because it's something that they really believe in, and it's about their personal community. Go ahead, Danny.
And I think that really shows, now that you mentioned it, it shows in the dialogue. Our mutual friend, Sam, who has appeared in our Brother Bear episode, he was watching a different show, mind you. He was watching The West Wing. And what he told me that was really interesting about The West Wing was that everything was really well written. Everything, right? But when it comes to the dialogue isn't in terms of West Wing. The dialogue isn't necessarily bad, but what the dialogue is that you don't really typically imagine people having a conversation and using that sort of dialogue, like that sort of text, right? And so one of my takeaways about the show as well was like, oh, this dialogue is weird, but not in a bad way, right? It's weird because it feels atypical to an actual human conversation, and it's just like how the conversation flows. But there was such a high priority of this character needs to have this piece of information shown in this scene, right? So how are we going to present that? And so does the dialogue, does the text suffer for that? Not necessarily, right? Like, it's very clear that the text is not written by people who are acclimated with, like, studying dialogue. This isn't a sort of like David Mamet sort of thing where we're looking at somebody who has somehow put, replicated human dialogue onto a page. No, it's very clearly a script that these characters are saying, but yet at the same time, I think it's beautifully sort of veiled by the acting quality of these actors. And I mean, across the board, right? I can't think of one actor in this show that does less of a job. Maybe like the actor that plays Poot is like the only one that I can think of is like, okay, I mean, maybe he could have done more in this one instance, maybe like on the phone here in this one scene, right? But I think what you said speaks volumes to the quality of the show that it literally has in terms of its text, but it also furthermore speaks to the quality of the show overall with how the overall narrative is written. It's such a clear emphasis in telling the story in a sort of big scope, big picture, right? That I'm fairly firm in the sense of how much of a priority it is, like each scene has to be here. Each scene is like this. Each scene needs to be this. Blah, 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 blah. Like, there was such a great focus in that, and I think that focus is especially shown in the final episode, and this is where I want to present my sizzle serve that
Oh, man. Okay, yeah.
I think the best part about this show is its ending. At least the very first season, right? Once again, I can't speak on the other seasons, but the best part about the first season is the last few moments of the first season, so what the show does, it plays this sort of montage of sorts, right? But what this montage is saying to you, and what it's showing to you, I should say, is for example, Detective McNulty on this case, he's a detective and he gets demoted to like a policeman on a boat. We have Michael Santangelo, a minor character in the show who is also a detective, demoted to just a regular cop, right? We have Avon Barksdale, who was the ringmaster of this drug organization. We have him arrested, yet everything in terms of the organization of the drugs themselves and of the drug selling and of the business is completely 100% maintained because they couldn't get one of Avon Barksdale's lieutenants, Stringer Bell, played by Idris Elba, who does, I mean, just an amazing job. But we see everything just goes back to normal. Everything, all of the hard work that these characters put in, it feels 100% like it was for nothing, and that is exactly the point that the show tries to nail home, right? That you have perhaps some of these characters who loved doing this case, who had such a great sense of justice and a great sense of urge and need for what they were doing. But in the end, because of some people in power, they were held back. And not only do you see that on the detective side, but you see that a little bit on the criminal side too, primarily with D'Angelo Barksdale's character when, he wants to be his own person and he wants to be free from the life that he was born into in terms of selling drugs and making a living and making money like that. But it feels like he has his own shackles on him in his own way by his uncle, who is Avon Barksdale, and by his mother, who was introduced late into the season, but introduced very well. I think we see these parallels that you mentioned earlier perfectly, and we see it perfectly here at the very end of the first season, where you realize, oh, so this was all bullshit. But that's the point, and that's the main takeaway, that, oh, so the hardships that these characters had to go through meant nothing in the grand scheme of things. But let's speak on more Mac, perhaps after a break.
All right, if you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Now, just let me explain. First of all, it's free. Second of all, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a whole bunch more. And third, now this is really important, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Hear me when I say no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. And welcome back to the Artenders with Mac and Dan. So, what we were talking about right before was you had a sizzle serve. You said that your favorite scene, or I guess it was your gold medal. My bad. It was your gold medal. Your favorite scene.
No, sir. No, sir. I said my sizzle serve was the best part about this show.
Right.
Perhaps, like, other people will point to other scenes and other moments and other presentations that the show has, but I thought that the best thing that this show did was its ending.
Right. Yes. So, I am going to say that I do not think that the end was my personal favorite scene. My favorite scene was with a very young Michael B. Jordan. What is he, like 15 in this?
Just about, yeah, I think so. I'm on it.
Thank you, please. When he is playing chess in the park with the other guys, yeah? And it's so, because like you hear the analogy all the time these days, and it's kind of like it's become a cliche. It's often overused. Oh, did you find the age?
15. You were on the money, my friend.
Okay, sweet. We often find like the oh, you're just a pawn in the game of whatever, and that's very corny. But The Wire was like really one of the. They really brought that back. They really made that popular again, and it was because of this scene, so badass, where this kid who has similar to most of the criminals in this movie, or sorry, in this TV show, has been thrust into his life, and does not necessarily want it. He's trying. He finally has made a realization, and he is explaining it to the other people that he is around, where they're playing chess, and he's like, so this is all a game. And they say several times throughout the season, this is all a game. It's all the game. This is the game. And he's like, it's a game of chess, and you're just the little pieces. You're just the pawn. And then and then like they start to use it. I think like several episodes later, characters are like, yeah, we're like the little pieces in chess. And they're like, you mean pawns? Yes, so I would have to say that was my favorite scene, just because I think it really did an awesome job of summing up the show, what the show was really about, thematically, in terms of no matter how important you think you are or your job is, there's a totem pole, and there's always someone above you, no matter who you are. There's always someone above you, and you're just a part of the game. You're just playing the game, and you play the game as long as you can, and then you get out of the game. And it's really sad, but it's I think super astute. The other thing that we kind of segued into the last segment was the bit about the actors and how fantastic the acting was. And I'm going to have to agree with you. The acting was really, really superb. And it was really exciting to see from a lot of these people. But for me, at least, the first episode or two, I didn't really trust the actors yet. They were doing a lot of things that were very showy and very dramatic and kind of like fake, and it was bothering me for a while, and then I started trusting the actors more, and it got better and better, and they got more and more nuanced and subtle and whatnot. Like I think there was this one part where early on in, it might have been the first episode. They're all talking they're talking about what they want to do in terms of the case, and they're talking to a woman that's a representative from like the State Department or whatever. And she starts to leave, and she does this thing, and me and you have seen this so many times because we talked about it in our acting classes a bunch, that she like starts to walk out, and then they say something and she stops, and it's so unnatural because no one like dramatically walks at a door and then stops in their tracks and like takes a moment to themselves. It's like that's really a very theatrical thing, but like most people would just like turn around, or they like listen to something, they're like, oh my gosh, I have to stay here, what the heck. But she was like, she really took her time and like handed up, and I was just annoyed by it. But what I found in research is that apparently um, the creators of the show and the directors, they told the actors why they were making the show, what the show was really about, what their plans for the show were going to be moving forward, and the types of stories they wanted to tell and why they were telling them. In terms of like, we want to make this about Baltimore, we want to make this about the community, we want to look at this small example because really it's about all of America, and we want it to be as real as possible. And after the actors saw the first 2 episodes edited, they were like, oh, this show looks a lot different than I thought. Very, very similar to how we saw the first few episodes and we're like, oh, this is wrong. This isn't Hawaii Five-0. This isn't Bones. This isn't Monk. This isn't Psych. We just go back to listing. We just go back to listing all of the cop shows. They told them, about this, and then all of the actors were like, oh, well, we're shooting in Baltimore. Let's just go out and like look at Baltimore for a while and take our inspiration there. And so that apparently was a huge turning point for all the actors in the show in terms of seeing all the people, meeting the people that they had to do a service to, that they had to represent. Specifically, Andre Royo, who was the actor who played Bubbles, who was an addict on the show. Met quite a few.
I loved Bubbles.
Oh, it was superb. Was an absolute masterclass, this guy. And so apparently he did such a good job because he met so many of the people, so many of the people that like other addicts in like rehab centers and things like that, and on the streets that he was portraying. And he got so into it that on set, as he was making his way from the trailers to the set, he got stopped by security on several occasions because they thought that he was a homeless guy that wandered into the set. They did not even recognize him as famous actor Andre Royo, which is so interesting to like, oh my gosh, that's wild. And several times that he said that there were times where he was walking around the streets of Baltimore in his makeup, like working on his walks and working on his like tics and stuff, and that there were people that approached him and were attempting to give him drugs because they mistook him for the person they were actually trying to give drugs to. Like they were going to meet up with a homeless guy and like make an exchange, but they thought that Andre Royal was the guy. And so he was like offered drugs and he had to be like, no, I'm not the guy. And like snap out of it and be like, no, you need to leave right now. Like get out of here, like please. And yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And that makes a huge difference in the show. Them realizing, oh, this isn't a regular show. This is meant to be about real people that are also a part of the show. Like they have extras in the series that, like I said earlier, are from Baltimore, are there because they love Baltimore so much that as an actor you have to show up and you have to do a service to the people that you are looking at, working with every day. So I thought that was a very interesting part of the show and a big turning point. Yes, Danny?
I think it goes to show the both uniqueness and interesting quality of the characters, as well as the characters themselves being these sort of blank slates, that they're moving beyond just being characters and also being representations of the people that live in these cities that breathe life. And I think one of the things that the show does really well in order to have these characters be more and actually be people in a space and in an environment and in this city and doing these things and having these wants and desires, and it's how this show incorporates little moments and little scenes, right? So you'll get in this show scenes where they don't last for more than 20 seconds.
Yeah.
And it's just like, maybe it's a character coming home back to their significant other. Maybe it's a character just eating some food with another person. Maybe it's another character just like looking at something for a moment or taking pictures of something. Like, it's just those little moments, something as simple as that. But what the show does, instead of that, I feel other shows do, is that the show moves beyond just showing that these characters are living life, but they also take the opportunity to not only show that these characters are living life, but also show the growth that these characters are experiencing within that moment, right? So they use each and every scene for storytelling purposes.
Yes.
As opposed to just show something that the characters are doing, right? Like, these small scenes actually do play into the greater narrative and shows a greater helps us with obtain a greater understanding of these characters and how these characters operate. Something as small as when Lester Freeman, who, if I had to give a gold medal to a character, this man is my gold medal. He is amazing, played by Clark Peters. And the suavity, as I like to say, that this character inhibits is just wondrous. But how he controls every scene, like it's that sort of stage presence, as it's called. But something as small as he goes into the office, or we see him just messing with the little dollhouse furniture items that he's building, or we see him go into the office and one of the pole dancers from the club nearby, Chardine, just kisses him on the cheek. Like, something as simple as that not only is this character is living life, but it's also a critical storytelling moment. And we don't think it's critical in that moment, right? Because it feels insignificant, and it feels insignificant because it only takes a few seconds, but it shows the sort of quality and the care that each of these characters get.
That, I think, is a perfect segue into My Sizzle Serve. My Sizzle Serve is, I can't think of a better TV show, movie, really anything, with better nonverbal communications, with better nonverbal scenes. It's unreal. Because like you were talking about, it is really interesting for character reasons. It is really interesting for like moment to moment, like scene building and things like that. I think the thing that sets this show apart is that there are moments, important plot moments, where you as an audience need desperately to know exactly what's happening with a moment, and rather than tell you straight up, tell you exactly what's happening and how it's happening, it'll just be a glance. It'll just be eye contact. And like you said, it'll be like a 20-second scene where someone's sitting there, someone comes around the street corner, they make eye contact, and then one person is just like, wow, like they like raise their eyebrows or something. And that's the end of the scene. And it matters and it makes sense as an audience member, as well as it excites you because you're not being spoon-fed. Even though it's obvious, and even though it would take a dummy not to, unless you're absolutely not paying attention to the show, you know exactly what's happening. It makes you feel smart. You know what I mean? As an audience member, you feel like, oh man, I'm such a I'm so proud of myself for catching that, or that's so interesting, even though it's really clear. And I think that is a testament to the director of the show, or the director of this season, Ed Bianchi, something like that. And of course, obviously, me being super directing minded, I that's one of the first things I see and one of the first things that I think of. But that I would have to say is my sizzle serve. What was your comment, Danny?
Well, I wanted to kind of comment on the fact that it feels Chekhovian in a way, and
Ooh,
so
look at you go.
look at me go, bringing in Anton Chekhov, because that's how much of an old soul I am.
Yeah, really. But you're right. Yeah.
But it's Chekhovian in the sense of the best way I feel that I can describe Anton Chekhov is this Russian playwright from over 100 years ago, and how he incorporates life into these characters. But Chekhov is a trap, because if you don't fill in those moments of life with character, then you have nothing. That if you assume that just living the life as those characters is going to be enough for those characters, that is wrong. It is filling those moments with the wants and the desires that the characters need and the characters need to do. And I think that's what this show does so well, that it feels like actually Chekhovian, that you see these characters in these brief moments of life, these brief glimpses of life. You may get just a short snippet of, of a deal being made in the projects, and we see Wallace, where we see Wallace, who is played by Michael B. Jordan, a 15-year-old Michael B. Jordan.
Excellently, by the way.
We see Wallace, sort of see this interaction, but what it does is that it's not just showing, hey, this character, he's a human being. No, like, in terms of, like, this character, a human being does things, right? A human being in the sense of, he's experiencing something every living moment. And that is the difference between the quality of so many things. And I think we spoke on it of Siberian Lady Macbeth last time, previous episode, where if you fill in the gaps, right? If you fill in the gaps of character, living those moments in their life and just filling every moment with a want and desire, and just even as an actor, you're reminding yourself, okay, what do I want? What do I need? What do I need to do in order to get what I want, right? And if you're constantly thinking that, and if you always have a POV of something instead of just nonchalantly standing there, then it fills those moments like it's nothing.
Yeah.
And especially when you have a cast and an ensemble this large for a show, it is absolutely critical to fill those moments meaningfully every time, because maybe your total screen time on this show is not even 5 minutes when they're about 13 hours worth of something. But even more so, to speak on, because even though the dialogue of the show perhaps is a little bit weird here and there, how the show approaches scene non-verbally is fantastic. I'm going to be, a little bit gluttonous here, per se, because if I were to give a gold medal to a scene, I would actually give this gold medal, and yes, I know, I'm just going all willy-nilly with the gold medals, like going akimbo and firing off in all directions.
Yeah.
If I had to give it to a scene, it would be the detective work, the investigation that McNulty and his partner Bunk, played by Wendell Pierce, that they do in the apartment of this seemingly inconspicuous murder done upon this girl. I think her name was Deidre. And they were able to figure out through things here and there, oh, so this is related to the Barksdale case. And this entire scene, let me explain how great the scene is, because this scene goes on for a few minutes. The only word, for the most part, and variations of this word, the only word that is spoken between these characters back and forth is the F word.
Yeah. And different variations, right?
Exactly.
Right.
And so I know it's not non-verbally in the sense, right? But they're not
it's pretty much
communicating each other,
Yeah.
right? It's not verbally because they're using it as a sound, right? As opposed to, instead of like ouch or ooh, right?
Right.
They're using the F word, but they're using it as a sort of thinking word, right? And as a communicating word. And so I'm kind of cheating here when I say non-verbally. Now I'm walking myself back. But how they use this one word.
It's non-linguistic.
Exactly. And the best part about that scene too is, even if they're using that one word, and even though they're thinking with that one word and only communicating with this one word, you are able to piece together everything with them in this scene, and they don't say anything else but the F word.
Yeah.
It is a testament to the overall writing of each individual scene to this show. And that's something, it's moments like those when you think to yourself, holy crap, like I'm watching something different. Like the quality of
Yeah.
what you're watching is showing, right? There are so many times where you may be watching a movie or a TV show where you're like, this is good, but it's fine. But rarely do I feel that the quality of something immediately jumps right off of the screen, and you say to yourself, holy cow, I am watching something that is incredibly smart, incredibly intelligent. And the biggest part, and I think the biggest takeaway for me of the show, is that it is incredibly purposeful. Mac, do you have a thought?
I was actually talking about this with my students this past week, because we're reading the two shows we're doing this semester, and one of them was The Bad Seed. I don't know if you've ever heard of The Bad Seed. It's a horror movie from the 1950s, but it was originally like a play, and it's pretty good. But we were talking about how the most interesting part of the entire play is whenever the mom is, because there's this little girl and she is like a murdering psychopath, and it's basically like the mom's journey to trying to come to terms with that fact, and then what she does about it, that knowing that her child is. So it gets really frustrated with her daughter because her daughter won't admit it, even though she's caught her in the act, and she starts like violently shaking her daughter. And and by the way, a very important detail is that in the scene prior, the mom realized that the mom found out that her biological mother was also a murdering psychopath. Her daughter is a murdering psychopath, and so she's shaking her daughter. And then in the stage directions, she stops, and it says she realizes what she is doing, and she holds her hands behind her back, and it continues the scene with her hands behind her back. And I was like, so why does she do that? And then the kids were like, I don't really know. And then there's always one kid in every class that was like, oh, it's because she's afraid, because she doesn't want to be like her mom and like her daughter. And I was like, freaking exactly. And that is the most interesting part of the entire play. And I was like, so what did we learn from this? The most interesting part of most really, really intelligent scripts is not in the script. The best part of the script is usually not in the script. And The Wire does that like 1,000 times over. And also in Chekhov. In Chekhov, the most interesting parts of Chekhov are not in the script. And that's why people often are like, man, this is boring. It's like, no. It's because you have to read with ultimate imagination and ultimate world building skills. And you have to read a lot slower than you think, because it's all there. It just takes a lot of puzzle building in your head in order for it to really click, and in order for it to really come to fruition. So I had a question for you, Danny, and this is kind of a transition. Do you think that this series could be made nowadays?
I think it could, but it only here's the reason why we're reviewing this show is because of how good this show is, right?
Yeah.
We brought up some other shows like CSI, NCIS, and kind of the shtick of that show is just like you've seen one episode. For the most part, you've seen them all. And that the only really interesting things that those shows do is just like, what crazy wacky thing are they going to do this time, right? But this is, like I said, the quality jumps off the screen. So I think in terms of if this show just happened to be released today, right, ignoring the sort of anachronistic qualities that, people are still using newspapers and pagers, right? And that being a super duper important plot element of the show. I mean, would it be made today? I don't know. That's a tough question, but I think this show has aged really, really well, and I think that's the bigger thing, right? But what the show does with the humanity to both sides is a critical factor to its age and to how it still stands in terms of the socio-political politics that we have today.
Something that you touched on for a second, that we talk about this, or at least me and the writers that I know talk about this all the time, which is, I feel like the very first question you always have to answer for yourself, like right before you write a script, So you've storyboarded it, you know what your story is going to be, and you're about to start, and then you have to remind yourself of the very first question of all writers nowadays. If it takes place today, what are you going to do about phones? Because phones ruin most stories nowadays. So it's funny that you said that, because I totally agree. That's a very important part, and a lot of things would not be the case if people had smartphones. Google would have solved a lot of scenes. Really high quality cameras, high quality cameras that are attached to things that are normal to have around you. Video, audio, things like that. Anyway, but I think the hardest, the toughest sell about the show, and why I'm not sure. I'm not saying that it wouldn't succeed nowadays, but I'm not sure if it would even get made in the first place necessarily, or really come to light as a show that is as brilliant as it actually is that it is paced a lot different than everything made nowadays. And it also skips over the action. It does a specific job. It tries its hardest to, every time that you're about to get that chase scene, every time that you're about to get that, like, they're about to get the bad guy or whatever, like a movie cop show or whatever normally does, it does it tries its hardest to not show you that. It skips over those scenes. There are only a couple times where they show you chases, or where they show you violence, and it's because like something really specific and important happens. It's not just they get the guy, or else they would just cut to the very end of it whenever they already have him, or whenever they're questioning, or whenever they're the person's already dead or something. So I think because of that, because the show is, so much of it happens in between the lines, so much of it happens at a slow pace, and because the first few episodes you have no idea what to make of the show, and you don't realize that all of the little stuff is important. I haven't seen anything like that in a very long time, and I haven't seen anything like that would especially that would survive on like platforms like Netflix or Hulu, because most of the shows that we see nowadays are, they have to hook you fast, and they have to be very clear about what's happening. But of course, if it was to be made nowadays, it would stay on HBO, because this is a perfect HBO show. Go ahead, Danny.
On that token, a common element of, and once again, I am old, Greek theater.
Nice.
Is
nice.
They would have
Chekhov and Greek theater. Wow.
A lot of critical action be performed off of the stage for the audience not to see. The biggest, most famous example, I would think, is in Oedipus Rex, when he finds out that he killed his father and married his mother. What he does off stage, mind you, and it is explained to you by a messenger who is on stage, he tells you what's happening, is that Oedipus takes off the pins from his robe and he gouges his eyes out, and there's blood everywhere, and there's this horrifying image that's happening. And the mother dies too. I think she's asphyxiated in some way. And what they're doing specifically is, of course, they didn't have the resources to do a really good job of how to present that. But also, when you have somebody describing to you in visceral detail what's going on, it is always, for the most part, going to be more effective in terms of a storytelling device than it is to actually have the thing going on. So let's use an example from The Wire, right?
Please.
A critical moment towards the end of the season is when we have Kima, Detective Greg's, one of, like I said, the detectives, and she is posing as one of the dancers for the club owner Orlando. And because they arrested Orlando, they're using him as a sort of snitch and gateway in order to get farther into the case. Things go wrong. They shoot up Orlando, and they also shoot up Kima as well. But you don't see them shoot Kima at all. And so the harrowing part about it is you're actually hearing Kima on the radio as, you know, this thing is going down, as Orlando gets shot and as she is getting shot. And so you're filled with this imagination in your mind of like, oh no, what has happened, because you don't have the answers right then in that moment. And that is one of the more effective things that this show does. Now, there are a lot of things nowadays, and I think this is because of what we've been geared towards with some things like the Marvel films, the Star Wars films, and even Game of Thrones, that those are series that are action-oriented, that they want to tell the story through the action because the action is the more exciting part, and the action is what is going to get people to stay for them, right?
Right.
But we have something that we see in this show where we don't see Kima get shot. We don't see the stick-up boy get tortured and then thrown onto this car to be shown in the projects. What we do get is a heavier emphasis of story because they're reserving the action to the side, and we hardly get any real action. There isn't the stereotypical cop chasing somebody else in a scene, except for this one moment. But how it's shot is not in the sort of, James Bond sort of of photography, of directography, where the camera is constantly following the action. It's sort of the camera's right here and it's looking around, and a cop is from this corner, a cop is from that corner, and it's very messy. But like I said, there's such a heavier emphasis of story that I do understand what you're saying, because there are so many times that we feel nowadays that story doesn't necessarily sell. And so many of these corporations want to make money. And in some ways, how can you blame them? And in other ways, yes, you can. But that's the big thing, is that there is a lost emphasis of story.
Yeah.
And so story is taking the back seat to what is going to get the most buyers. And that is, I think, probably the reason why, if this show was made, piece for piece, pound for pound, remade nowadays, it would find a tougher time and a tougher audience, because, mind you, this was in 2002, and the quality of television at that time was basically itself. And if Sopranos was around that time, then maybe that. But aside from that, couldn't tell you any other show that was from that time that is worth being mentioned in the same breath as this one. And that's my biggest takeaway when it comes to this show. And the biggest, quality of it, and like I said 20,000 times, the quality jumps off of the screen.
I have two qualms.
Kablamo.
What a strange catchphrase. The first one is my one debate for another show that was happening around the same time that needs to be recognized is Lost. I blow smoke up that show's ass all the time.
I was just trying to rattle off a hot take. I was
and
trying
it was
to
good.
Get in there like, this is my opinion. This is what I really feel. Aren't I passionate?
I agree with you for the most part.
No, I think you're right, yeah.
I agree with you for the most part, but goodness gracious, that show is so freaking good. Anyway, and the other one is oh gosh, I'm not sure. I think you're going to have to go and edit in a failure because you used the word directography, and it was hilarious. You said cinematography or directography?
I'm really sad you called me out.
Did you feel it after you said it, where you're like, oh no?
Mac, I couldn't think of the word cinematography. So I said no, the best part, let's unpack this a little bit. I said photography first.
You did.
I knew that was wrong. Cinematography was still not in my head, and I was like, the next best thing, directography. I made up a word, and you know what? You're welcome.
And I'm not gonna lie, you said it with such confidence that I had to look up. I was like, that might be a real word. I can't make fun of him. He probably, that was a real word. I look it up. That is just not the case. But I mean, superb. And I think we're gonna have to use it from now on. Anytime that we mean cinematography, I'm gonna say directography, just to mourn the loss of Danny's ethos. So. In conclusion, because obviously we're gonna have to come back to this series. There's no way around it, especially with the way that this one ended. And what I read about seasons to come is that they take a look at different sections of the divide between the police and the crime community, and specifically the drug community. They take a look at it from different angles, like they look at it in terms of schools, they look at it in terms of the press and the media and things like that. Um, so we're gonna have to keep watching, right?
And already, really fast, I want to say that we already got like a snippet of that when in the first season we got, whiffs of the corruption that was in not only in the police department but in politicians as well. Surprise, surprise, but how this whole thing is intermingled in this mess. And it's the great thing that this show says, that you follow the drugs and you'll get the dealers and the people who buy and the suppliers. But if you follow the money, that you don't know where you're gonna go.
Yeah, and that even everyone that you're seeing, no matter how important they are in terms of the show, they're all pawns, which is such an airy thing to think about the further you get into the show. Because every single time you get introduced to a character and you're like, oh, that's the person we've been waiting for. That's like the most important person. Like that's what we've been like working up to. They're nothing, and it's just going to keep going, no matter how high up the chain you go. Anyway, so we will absolutely touch on that, obviously, in the future. So what are your final thoughts as we're heading into away from season 1 and eventually going to watch season 2?
I'll keep this short and sweet. I already see the inklings of why people consider this show as one of, if not the best television series of all time. The big thing for me to say is, if you're still listening to this episode and you haven't watched it, find a way to get HBO, and at the very least watch the first season, because it has this sort of dual cliffhanger where it's very clear that they're setting up for more stories to come, but the first season is also this amazing container of storytelling and acting and narrative. I mean, you have to watch it if you enjoy television of any kind in any form, and if you just enjoy good things. Mac, what is your final takeaway of this bad boy?
Good things. I'm actually watching it from Amazon Prime, so that's also an option. And it's superb. I'm excited. That's all I can say. I'm excited. I'm not going to make too many claims as to whether or not it is it deserves the clout that it gets.
Inklings, my friend, inklings.
Absolutely. I'm seeing some seeds planted. So yes, I'm very excited. So, may I pitch to you what we are doing for next week?
Poor favor.
I'd be happy to. I think it's funny that we review shows like full series, but like do a season every other week. It's just funny how that works, but I think it's kind of fun. Anyway, so for next week, what we are going to be watching is a little show that was recommended to be, funny enough, by several students. They were all like, that's the one you have to do because we think that you'd like it and we want to know what your opinions are on it based off of the other things that you guys have reviewed so far. And I don't know if you know much about the students that I have, but as I've said to you before, they're not a big fan of most average things. They're all huge fans of anime. So next week we will be reviewing Akame ga Kill.
A what?
Have you ever heard of it? Akame ga Kill.
I'm on it. Please get an explanation to my ears, please, right now.
Oh, I know very little about it. I believe it's on either Netflix or like Vimeo or something.
Interesting. What the hell is this?
Yeah, and have you ever even heard of it?
No.
That's exciting. The anime wizard Danny has been stumped. Yeah, so we will be doing that for next week. And anything else? Anything else for me, Danny?
That'll be it. Thank you very much, Mac.
Thank you very, very much, Danny Lavelle, and I will see you next week. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.